crafty friends, this is Jenny from crafttestdummies.com, and today we are going to make this card, and it's called an Eclipse card, but what I really want to show you is how to make the cabbage roses that I used both on the outside and the inside of the card. These are actually really easy to do. I am no watercolorist, but with a little help from my Jane Davenport Brights palette and a trusty water brush, I think this is something that you can do too. So let me show you how. As I mentioned, you are going to want to have a water brush or a fine paintbrush. I have my Jane Davenport Bright palette, and of course, watercolor paper. Please do not skimp and try and do this on cardstock. It doesn't hold the pigment very well. So get your paints ready by adding a little bit of water and then just kind of rubbing and scrubbing them. You'll see that they actually turn a color and they go a little more opaque as the color comes up and they are ready to use. And don't get hung up on the color, but we're going to need a dark and a light value for each rose. And we're going to make like a little trio of roses here in the corner. So we're going to start off just by making some little commas. These little commas are going to go around the outside, and like a rose, the further outside you go, the bigger the commas are going to get. And you'll notice because I'm making my strokes bigger, they actually also get lighter. And I'm kind of focusing my attention to one side because very rarely do you look at a rose like straight on. Usually you kind of look at it from one angle. But that's really all there is to it is comma, 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 a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, bigger. And as they get bigger, they get lighter, and we're just going to want to let that dry completely. If you feel like your brush is getting a little wet, or I'm sorry, a little too dried out, you can add a little more, but we are going to add some water later, which will fill everything in, because it does look a little weird. It's not, filled in yet, but trust me, we're going to get there. So if you've made your big roses in the corner, try making some little ones on the outside. It could be like a little cluster. But leave a little bit of space in between the petals because we are going to fill that in. But as you can see me demonstrating here, it's just comma, 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 and then a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And then I just keep rotating the paper until I have my two big cabbage roses in the corner and then two smaller ones on either side. Now, once you've kind of got your loose roses done, give them a nice drying. Make sure that it's completely dry because what we want is for that watercolor to kind of sit down on the paper, and then when we add our next layer, it will blend, but otherwise if you don't dry it first, it just kind of comes like this big muddy mess, and we want to still see the different lines that we created. So I actually switched to my thinner brush. I tried this bigger one, I didn't like it, but now I've chosen a slightly lighter color. And this is just as loose as it looks. I am just kind of swishing this color back and forth around over my existing petals that I've made and kind of blending them a little bit, but not too much. But going with a little more water, but it's just like swish, 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 swirl, 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 swirl. I mean, there's almost like a sound effect to it. And if it gets a little dry, add a little water and it'll also smooth back out. But these cabbage roses are very loose and very forgiving and very painterly. So don't get hung up. Trust me, you can do this. Recently, we had a group of teenagers at my house and I taught them all how to do this in an afternoon and they were all pretty pleased with their results. Now, if you wanted to, you could take your fine paintbrush and just add like one more layer, but don't forget, dry in between, as I almost forgot to do here. But you can add one more light layer as well. So here's just a really light pink, and again, just a really light swish, 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 comma, 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 comma over the top of everything. Now I'll show you another version that I did with this where I used some yellow and some orange to create a different look, and of course I've done this with blue, so you can just pick any color combination that you like because it's just really loose and impressionistic. So once you have your roses kind of done the way you want, we're going to go ahead and start with some leaves. No, I also do my leaves in two steps. So I pick my darker color of green and I just create some little stems going out. And actually, what I start with is I create the veins inside the leaves first. So it's a little bit darker, and I create the little veining by just kind of giving some little commas in towards the middle. And sadly, with the camera position, you can't see my handwork exactly, but you can see kind of what I'm doing. And I just create the little veins in the leaves first, and we're going to let those dry because the next thing we're going to do is create another layer over the top of it. And just like with the roses, it's going to blend and move first, but the first thing we want to do is just get that darker color laid in. So as I mentioned, make sure it's all dried. I'd used a little bit of what was on my brush just to fill in some of the little spaces around the edges, but you don't have to do that. And now we're going to go back in with our lighter color and mix some up. I really love these Jane Davenports. They just mix up beautifully, and I don't ever see that like kind of granulated pigmentation that you can sometimes get with watercolors. They stay just really nice and vibrant. But I'm going to have this be a lot lighter, and then I'm just going to create my little leaf shape around my leafy stem. 1, 2. It's basically two big commas. And then if I want, I can go back in and add just a little bit of lining with that dark color to give it a little bit more of a painterly look. But watch again. So it's 1, 2. Then I kind of fill it in and I move the leaf veining around a little bit. And then maybe just go back in along the edge and define it a little bit. And if I want it to blend a little more, I let it blend a little more. I can also add these little mini leaves that kind of peek out around the side of the roses, almost as if, the little part of the bud there at the bottom is kind of peeking out, or it's just the idea of some other leaves. And again, as I mentioned, I am not a spectacular watercolorist. I don't pretend to be, but I just made these and I'm like, this feels like it's something everybody could do. And I was pretty pleased with the results. So again, I'm just making those kind of comma leaves, filling in. Some have a little more water, some have a little less. I use sometimes just the water that's on the table to move the colors around and create some other little shadow leaves behind it. But just to kind of fill in as you like, and make sure you do both sides. So here I am just finishing up the other side and filling in. Now I am leaving kind of like this diagonal stripe in the middle open because that's where I'm going to put my die cut. So after I finish getting everything the way I want it and drying it thoroughly with my heat tool front and back, I'm going to add just a little something extra. I'm a messy person and I kind of like that in my crafts, so I'm adding a little bit of water to a paintbrush, and now I'm going to add just some splatters over the top. And again, I kind of like this effect. I think these little speckles kind of unify it. It makes it look very intentionally loose, and I recommend you do it with two different colors. Pick a pink and pick a green. Just pick two that look nice together, and add your little speckles and spatters. It kind of keeps that middle section from feeling too empty, but yet, like I said, we do want to leave it open because that's where we die cut the sentiment that we're going to put in. So you remember earlier I said sometimes I like to add a little bit of orange or yellow. I just felt like this was so flat that it needed some yellow to make some orange to give it a little bit more depth. So you don't have to. I did. I had a little bit of that yellow and then kind of swished it over the top and dabbed off the extra, but it just made it a little bit warmer, which is kind of what I was going for. So again, we're going to dry the whole thing and then move on to the cutting. So now's the fun part. We're going to actually assemble the card, and I apologize. I didn't use the same card front because I finished it and I mailed it off. So this is another one that I had done as well. So using the die cut of your choice, cut out your sentiment right in the middle, kind of in that empty diagonal space, and then glue the main part down to a card, and that's what's underneath that acrylic block. I find that if I glue it and then press it, it helps keep it in place. You also can see on the card that I've glued all of those little negative spaces down too. So what I have left on my table that I'm working on is the die cut of the word thanks, and I have applied all of these little pieces of foam tape. And I know Doris actually has a super thin foam tape, but what I have is the big roll of 3M stuff, so I'm cheap. I'm using what I've got. And I've just cut little pieces, and now I'm picking them off because what I'm going to do is actually layer it right over that space in the middle where it says thanks. So it's, I know people have said, well, you could just, cut it out of foam, or you could just stack a bunch of sentiments. But the point of this isn't just to pop it up, but also to create like this, the shadow, and then also be able to peek and see the color of the cardstock underneath. And that's why I use this kind of rose color so that you actually can see it. Now here I am placing it down, and it's almost like a little maybe they should have called it the camouflage technique, because it is, I don't know, it's there, but it's not. But again, you see the shadow line, and then you also see that color of the base cardstock showing through. And again, I just kind of press it with my old acrylic block, just so that it stays nice and level. And as I move it around, you can see that color underneath. It's really impactful. It's very subtle. It's very classic, but we're going to pop it up and do a little something on the inside too. I invariably have leftover pieces of cardstock once I trim things down that just are these weird sizes. So I went ahead and added 3 cabbage roses on a little extra piece and put it on the inside. It's kind of a nice surprise to carry that pretty theme outside to the inside. Then I stamped it with the VersaFine Clair. It was a really close color match, and it's a beautiful pigment ink. So there you go. It's all set together. And here's the one I did in that blue. And I have done a couple more on my Instagram feed as well, but I think they're really pretty, really impactful. And you can do this. It could say thanks, it could say friend, it could say happy birthday. You pick it, make it your own, and most importantly, just try it out. Don't be afraid to try some new things. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this demo of the Jane Davenport Brights and Cabbage Roses with Jenny. Thanks so much for watching. Have a crafty day.